Hi, good morning and welcome to ASEAN Kita, where we discuss about ASEAN as a region and also its potential towards Malaysia's chairmanship in 2025. And I'm Amir Rahman, and with me, my co-host today, we will discuss on topic about economy, where recently Minister Nik Ahmad highlighted that while ASEAN is on track to become world's fourth largest economy by 2030, the true measure of success lies in how inclusive the growth is, ensuring that every community benefits. And his remarks reminds us about economic integration isn't just about higher GDP figures. It's about uniting our diverse economies, breaking down trade barriers, and creating opportunities that reach every corner of the region, Faham.
And we have two guests online who will unravel this topic, who is Research Assistant at Bait Al-Amanah, Yugendran Sivakumaran, and also Distinguished Professor Dr. Rajah of Economics at the Asia Europe Institute, University of Malaya. Thank you for joining ASEAN Kita.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, let's start with Professor Rajah. How do you define economic integration in the context of ASEAN, and why is it crucial for economic growth?
I think one thing that should be also addressed is ASEAN began as a political entity first. So we still do not want wars and so on. So that aside, indeed, much of the focus now is on economic integration. And obviously, economic integration means that we have certain common rules so that member nations can enjoy the benefits from having those common rules, and at the same time seeing that it becomes a vehicle for promoting trade. And this is important because we all know, if you're an economist, it becomes quite clear that trade is a major driver of economic growth. And with that, we have the opportunity to see it trickling down to the masses. Of course, there are other instruments that need to be introduced if we want to see that distribution at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Prof, over the past few decades, ASEAN has moved from a loose association to a more integrated economic bloc. In your view, what have been the most transformative milestones in this journey, and why do those moments stand out?
No, I think one of the important things that's happened, especially since the integration of the Indo-Chinese countries, the transition economies of Vietnam, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, and Cambodia, is to create an environment where we have relatively similar trade tariffs, for example, ad valorem no more than 5%. And at the same time, we have the introduction of this rule of origin, which gives you 40%, so long as you record appropriate 40% value added in total within ASEAN, then you enjoy those privileges that are there. Now, what it actually means is that compared to other regions, we come across an environment where entrepreneurs, whether it's small and medium-scale enterprises or large enterprises, they are subjected to the same rules. And therefore, we allow for specialization to take place in relation to comparative advantages. And of course, I'm not a person who completely supports the idea that you need to have static comparative advantages or natural comparative. You can create those competitiveness, but again, there are certain measures, certain rules to be followed, and that should not be at the expense of member nations, which is also the basis of how the WTO came into being, which is also why ASEAN became one of the earliest regions to be accepted by the WTO when WTO opened up in 1995.
Well, Yugendran, if you look at it, ASEAN's goal of creating a fully integrated economic community is hindered or held back by differences in national policies among its member countries. So while the ASEAN Economic Community (AEC) has made progress, trade rules, investment policies, and digital regulations still vary widely, creating obstacles to smooth economic cooperation. What do you think? Like, how can ASEAN countries, align their policies to speed up economic integration and boost regional competitiveness?
So when we look at it, trying to get multiple countries to align their goals, it's going to be heavily difficult, even though that you're in ASEAN or whatever. But that is one way to find a goal that benefits everybody, in which that they could push together to find a way to work together, in which it does not threaten their own national security or their own domestic policies. That is one way we could see that these countries to try to boost and work together. Because yes, when we look at free trade in a way, yes, free trade is great, having aligned policies is great, but you have to look at one country's security. You need to look at, though we are going to work together this, I'm not going to get the short end of the stick, which is a very tricky game that we see on the global scale currently. So by working together into having goals that we could say is not detrimental to one country to another, that would be a very efficient way that you can work together, such as the SGD goals.
Can I just add a few points to complement what you just mentioned? I think it's important to recognize that we are of contrasting development stages here. In fact, if you speak about SDGs, SDG 1, which is about alleviating poverty, SDG 2 is about ending hunger, which is not a problem in Singapore and Brunei, but it's a serious problem in many of these countries, especially so with the newcomer which has got observer status now, Timor-Leste. So given that sort of contrasting developmental levels, it's inevitable that we can't expect the same levels of digitalization, the same levels of attempts to strengthen climate resilience, for example.
Yugen, it's interesting that you mentioned reducing trade barriers is often cited as a key driver for growth. And could you share your perspective on how lowering tariffs and other trade restrictions enhance intra-ASEAN trade and in turn fuels broader economic growth in the region?
Oh, that is perfect. I love free trade. Yeah, I believe in limiting the amount of tariffs needed into specialty fields. So again, it's simple. When you have lower tariff, it's cheaper for these countries to trade. And when it's cheaper for countries to trade, they tend to do more business together. When we look at stuff like the gravity model, distance and tariffs are two huge things that matter into a country's ability to trade. And when it is cheaper, again, you tend to trade more. And not only that, since it is cheaper to trade in the ASEAN region, it opens up for foreign direct investment. And since we are part of like RCEP and CPTPP, countries can use what we have and use it to their advantage. And so we can see an influx of foreign direct investment because of that also. So again, tariffs foster a better community. Again, increases the amount of trade because again, it is cheaper. That is just the simple and the easiest thing. And when it's cheaper when it's cheaper to import, maybe it's cheaper to innovate. And so we have like a lifting tides, raising boat situation. But of course, it has to be, tariffs cannot be fully free, because or not, if you're going to have no tariffs in certain industries in which is of key importance to you, then it can be trade regressive in a sense, because then your own countries manufacturing or they can't compete against other countries basically.
Yes, and perhaps I might be posing this question to both of you. Well, economic integration in ASEAN has made the region more appealing to foreign investors by creating a unified market with fewer trades barriers and clearer policies. And of course, this has boosted foreign direct investment FDI flows, which also attracts global businesses to invest in ASEAN's large consumer base, skilled workforce, and also low production costs. And FDI also brings benefits like technology transfer, improved productivity and job creation. So, what steps do you think ASEAN can take to attract more FDI and ensure that it benefits not only the local economy but also the whole society?
That's something that one needs to address if you're talking about trade, if you're talking about specializations. The examples that I know, and I work quite considerably for the UNIDO, there's no example of countries that have introduced passive industrial policies, by which I mean simply enabling markets to see that markets are dominant. Countries like Malaysia is an example. Why we are now trapped, or rather entrenched in the middle income trap, is simply because we have not been able to create the sort of technological catch-up that is necessary to compete at the frontier, which means to say that much of the specialization we have, that applies to Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, except for Singapore. For some reasons, their leveraging strategy has managed to see that multinationals. So in other words, FDI itself is not a panacea. It's how you actually work with them in the case of Singapore. But that's not the same with Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, though. There, the focus was on national capital. So in the end, it's about building capabilities nationally, whether it's multinationals over there, hiring local workers, or we're talking about national firms. Here in our own country, Malaysia, as well as the other neighboring countries that we have, except for Singapore, we have not managed to do that. So we talk about chip design, for example, which is central to our NIM before. That's one. Second, we are talking about specializing in semiconductors. How far have we actually gone? If you look at the patent take-up, if you look at the extent of R&D we do, except for peripheral R&D, minimal. Actually, I have papers to prove that sort of point. So we need to speak about active industrial policy to see that we actually see catching up by firms, whether they are multinationals over here or national firms here.
And from my end, I totally agree with Prof. Rajah, but I see the future of ASEAN is bright. Yes, we had a slow, after the Asian financial crisis, we had some issues with foreign direct investment. But over time, currently now, especially with NIMP in Malaysia, especially, we see, as you know, foreign direct investment is on the rise. And ASEAN, we are in a position that is very good, in which we have actually an excess amount of skilled labor in a couple of ASEAN countries, such as Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. There's not enough jobs, skilled jobs for them to work at. Like in Malaysia, we have, I think, 30% of our workforce under ILO statistics, we are skilled labor. But we don't have enough jobs for them. And so I think currently with that, Malaysia, with the multiple aspects that that is attractive to foreign investment, such as our cheap skilled labor, accessibility of land in ASEAN, and our potential capabilities. And as Prof. Rajah said, on the upgrading our, how to say this, investments in technology, we look to be a prime spot for future investments. And again, if we want to keep on pace with that, we need to keep on investing into R&D to make Malaysia more attractive.
Well, that's Yugen and Prof. Rajah on how economic integration can drive growth in ASEAN. But we will take a short break and we'll be right back after this.
Penyasaran subsidi diesel di Semenanjung tidak akan memberi kesan kepada harga barangan keperluan di Sabah, Sarawak dan Labuan.
660 individu berusia bawah 21 tahun di Sarawak telah diberikan kewarganegaraan.
Sarawak kini menjalinkan kerjasama dengan Bank Dunia dalam menjayakan perdagangan karbonnya.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Well, welcome back to ASEAN Kita with me, Farhan Hakimi, and my co-host, Samirul Aiman. We were talking about economic integration in the context of ASEAN, and we were speaking to two of our guests online, Yugendran Sivakumaran, Research Assistant by Amanah, and also we have distinguished Professor Rasiah of Economics at the Asia Europe Institute, University of Malaya. Well, perhaps still, Yugendran, if we look at it, ASEAN faces, major economic challenges, including supply chain disruptions, energy security, and the digital economy. And addressing these requires a proactive strategy that enhances the region's manufacturing capabilities, strengthens its energy grid, and also promotes digital inclusivity. So what structural reforms should ASEAN prioritize or adapt to position itself as a reliable hub for global trade and investment while mitigating external economic shocks?
Well, that's a very great question. Yes, we do in certain areas outside the main cities in ASEAN, we do face those issues, and it's a very hard answer because it needs a lot of capital and a lot of investment to restructure everything and to bring it up to par to global standards. Now, that is a huge issue when it comes to budgeting. That is a budgeting issue. It's, again, a fiscal issue. And how do they manage their finances in order to do that? Because, again, yes, we can always talk about, yes, these countries need to upgrade their infrastructure, but how are they going to get the funds to do so? Would they work with external countries such as China for funding to grow up their infrastructure? So it becomes more of a powerhouse manufacturing hub? Or do they raise taxes? Now, that is a very difficult and it's a slippery slope in which on how do you do that? Because there's no right or wrong answer. And at the end of the day, it can be very burdensome to the people or even the country's foreign relations. So that's not an answer that can be easily, in my opinion, easily answered.
Let's following on from Yugen, let's take what the minister just mentioned. We are poised to become, ASEAN is poised to become the fourth largest market by 2030. Now, that means enormous amount of scale, provided there's collaboration, cooperation to see that we appropriate the economies of scale. Obviously, it gives us a big advantage. But the question now is, how are we going to appropriate those synergies? I think there must be a lot more cooperation in relation, even if it means that we are going for the same industries. Now, an industry where we think it's state of the art, which is the future, simply because it addresses so many different issues, which is electric vehicles. Now, we also know that China has become the biggest center for electric vehicles, at least in relation to consumption. Although, of course, even in production itself, one can arguably make the case that either BYD is already there or it's overtaking Tesla. Now, with that sort of thing, we need to have strategies that are commonly acceptable to member countries. We have Tesla that was flown all the way from Shanghai to be sold here, but there is no supply capabilities created here. All we have is charging stations that Elon Musk promised to set up all over Malaysia. Other than that, we do not have, even though we have an aerospace policy here, a very clear aerospace policy over the 12th Malaysia Plan, targeting 1 billion ringgit to assist that. What have we done in order to create supply capabilities? Knowing that, in this case, Yugen began with distance. Here we are talking about heavy vehicles. Obviously, it means that there is room for locating such supply capabilities. And we can also cooperate in that sense. We just heard that apart from Potranjili starting to assemble electric vehicles, we also have a company emerging in Sabah, as well as BYD starting plans to assemble them. Similar developments are taking place in Thailand. We have Winfast, which is a nationally owned EV company in Vietnam. We also have Wuling, for example, in Jakarta. And BYD is also looking to go to Indonesia. And Indonesia also has components like nickel. Why it is imposed a tariff from exporting nickel outside in order to develop those capabilities. I think what we need to do is how these countries can get together, work as a team to see in what way they can appropriate these synergies. An area where such things are being discussed is what the Prime Minister of Thailand is talking about in terms of creating 6 countries where visas once given, like the Schengen countries in Europe, they can just enter there and get to all of those 6 countries, which obviously would mean it will give an incentive for more tourism. So some sort of thing should be discussed, given that Malaysia is now the chairman of the ASEAN Secretariat. I think it'll be helpful to discuss at those kinds of fronts to see that ASEAN gets to the next level by value added.
Prof, when we talk about economy, small and medium-sized enterprises are often described as also the backbone of our economy. How do you see economic integration benefiting SMEs in ASEAN, and what policy measures could be better support their growth and also their innovation, Prof?
I think targeting SMEs is an important point, not just because you create employment. Although, unlike say Taiwan or Italy, where SMEs dominate gross domestic product, we actually have large firms dominating here. I think something like about 40%. That's about all, even though by establishments, we are something like 98% come from SMEs, including micro firms. Now, I think what they need to do, a point that Yugen raised very much, you need really strong infrastructure to reach them. For example, if you want to, say, have training for SMEs, you cannot really attract these guys there because the firm doesn't function if any one of them gets out of the firm, which is something I often tell that, why aren't we using digital links? Which means to say a small single proprietor can easily access the digital nodes in order to access technology or even to incrementally transform some activities in their own firms. That's what we call not just learning by doing, looking, experimenting to many different. Most of the innovation that starts at that sort of incremental level. Now, if we cannot appropriate that, I think we'll be not appropriating the synergies that come with the scale that we're talking about by seeing ASEAN together. It's important to note that R&D itself, in the pure sense, is not the main part of innovation. Although, of course, that translates into patent take-up, all sorts of intellectual property rights, including industrial layouts, industrial designs, and so on. But key here is incremental innovation. Incremental here doesn't translate into that sort of proprietary rights, but that's the one that actually provides you the profits that you're looking for and provides the solutions necessary. And then a lot of business books written on that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Blue Ocean technology. Much of it is actually transforming ideas, integrating markets, or even making certain products that actually target different industries. And by that, they actually completely outpace demand from the distinction between blue ocean and red ocean technology. So the point here is, are we actually embracing them properly? Are we really reaching them? One of the things I realized that needs to change, it's not just in Malaysia, but most of the Southeast Asian countries, except Singapore is doing very well on that, EDB, is actually to bring this technology to them, because you already know what robots and drones do. You already know that. You don't have to go and see whether a firm is ready to embrace that. You just have to see what are the barriers that are preventing them from reaching them. First thing you need to do is to convince them they are there for their own benefit. I think a lot of what we need to do is to really be proactive to get them going.
Well, Yugendran, hope I pronounced your name right. Talk to me about other regional blocs like the European Union, EU, who have successfully implemented policies that perhaps ASEAN could adapt, emulate to strengthen its economic integration. For instance, the EU's common market and free movement of goods, services and labor have greatly facilitated trade and also economic growth. And also, of course, ASEAN can benefit from creating clearer regulatory standards, improving infrastructure connectivity, and also enhancing labor mobility to boost economic cooperation. So what elements, from the EU's integration model could ASEAN consider to implement and accelerate its economic growth and unity?
One of the biggest, I think, would be logistics. When we look at ASEAN countries, there's a huge disconnect between logistics between Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Singapore ranks number 1 in the world, Malaysia ranks number 29, Vietnam is in the 40s, whilst Thailand is also. So when we have huge logistic barriers such as that, interconnection becomes very difficult and more expensive. Yes, we are close, which may help lessen the cost, but still, if we have better logistical connections, it will be much more efficient in order to reduce the amount of trade barriers and increase trade between these nations. Also, in addition to that, I think we need to make it easier for labor to transfer between countries. Because right now we do know in Malaysia there's certain requirements for labor. I think, if not mistaken, the 6,000 salary to the 8,000 salary. So, and we do know that Thailand and Vietnam also has very stringent laws when it comes to labor. If we make labor access between these countries much more simpler, much more easier, I think the transfer and efficiency would be highly beneficial too. So those are, I think, the two main points that I would like to add. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when it comes to investment, most ASEAN members are highly generous and really happy to receive, so long as we attract firms to invest. But when it comes to movement of labor, it's not the same. And when it comes to issues governing labor standards and so on, it's also not the same. Now, why I'm saying this is, we know that if we go far back, something like 50% of the labor force in Singapore are Malaysians. This has been shown tangibly with evidence. And they earn a lot more money there. Why? Because they're willing to pay in order to get the best workers. I remember doing this study for the government of Malaysia, where even bikes from Kota Tinggi, guys are riding bikes to Singapore to work. He obviously mentioned to me, he's not going to trouble himself riding early in the morning to reach Singapore if that sort of money is not important for him. Now, what I'm mentioning here is we tend to focus a lot. Most countries that focus on transforming economies from low to high value added activities, if we're targeting foreign labor, they're talking about human capital. They're talking about getting people with skills, whether the engineers, technicians, people who can perform. A country that has the most sort of within Malaysia, ASEAN would be Philippines. Philippines, major part of their GDP actually comes from remittances from overseas foreign workers. Now, in the case of Malaysia, we have this brain gain program. I myself came under that program in 2004, but I didn't really see it as a program that accumulates people coming with tacit knowledge to appropriate economic synergies, which is key if you are looking at the success of Taiwan, Korea. And Elise Sextinian has this book, The New Argonauts. I very cleverly put, same with the case of Karnataka state in India, for example. So my feeling is the strategies are there for us to look at. The cat can look at the king. Why aren't we appropriating that sort of strategy so that the focus will be on what our NIMP4 is promising to raise median incomes from 2,600 in 2023 to 4,510 in 2030. For that to happen, GDP has to grow, value added has to grow.
I totally agree, Prof. Rajah. Again, we are so we are talking about, oh, Malaysia is having a brain drain, and then we're trying to brain gain everybody back. We're trying to bring in skilled labor into Malaysia, the smartest. But we have so many barriers in bringing people that benefit our country that it becomes a problem. If when you go, I've talked to multiple businesses in which they said they struggle to bring in the people they need because of the hard realities of bureaucracy. And when you have that, it becomes like, oh, you're saying one thing, but the other thing is an issue because it's an issue. And I think that there's a disconnect between what you're saying and what is happening.
Right, okay.
So I totally agree with you, Prof. Rajah.
Okay, we would like to thank Yugendran Sivakumaran, Research Assistant at Amanah, and also distinguished Professor Prof. Rasiah of Economics at the Asia-Europe Institute of University of Malaya for their insights on how inclusive, how economic integration in the context of ASEAN and why it is crucial for the region's growth. And I guess that is all from us on ASEAN Kita's today's episode. I'm Amir Rahman.
And I'm Farhan Hakimi. See you next time.